What's up? My name is Rosalind Claru, and you are now listening to Americanized, a storytelling podcast where you'll hear from eclectic first and second generation Americans share their stories and real life experiences as children of immigrants. Thank you so much for tuning into another episode of Americanized. In this episode, I talk with Thu Nguyen from Worcester, Massachusetts. Thu is a proud Vietnamese refugee who immigrated to the United States with their family at the young age of 1 year old. Currently, Thu is a youth worker and the first non-binary candidate for the Worcester City Council At-Large. They have a strong dedication for their community with a focus on healing work, liberation, and justice. They emphasize the leader within all of us and the power we all hold, as well as the work we can all do to connect and make an impact. So, stay tuned. So, Thu, welcome to the show. Thank you for being on, and I would like you to share a little bit about yourself, who you are, what you do, what your interests are, and all that good stuff.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. So I'm a queer Vietnamese non-binary refugee, and I'm currently running for Worcester City Council At-Large. Currently for work, I work at the Southeast Asian Coalition as the Director of Projects. And just in general, I've just been doing youth work for the last 10 years and community organizing and just, trying to do this fight for liberation and healing justice, the desperate things we need in life. Even though to me it feels like the baseline, but here we are really trying to do this work.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. I read up on you, and you've done like amazing work, and you seem like a very influential person, and just all around like a good person at heart, just doing what you're doing and calling it like the bare minimum, like just letting people live in peace.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely really try. My hope is that I hope that people aren't just inspired by me. Like that's not the point. I think the point is that people see themselves being able to do all the things that I do. Like I think I'm an ordinary person who just really cares and who believes in investing in humanity, in people, and in their communities. I don't want people to look at me and be like, oh, Thu does so much. Like that's the extraordinary thing. It's like, no, we're all capable of really doing this work together, and to be happy and really be in love with our life and feel fulfilled as we do this.
Right. I love that. It's like seeing you and knowing that we can do the same thing. You are inspiring others to do what you're doing. That's the hope, at least.
Yeah. The last thing I would want is for someone to be like, oh yeah, Thu's carrying, the bags so no one else has to do it. It's like, nah,
Right.
it's like, it's so much more fun when we're all doing this together.
That's true. That's very true. So you're campaigning for the Worcester City Council, and I heard that you recently got on the ballot.
I
So
did,
how
I
does that
did.
feel?
It's it feels very real, and I mean even before then there was just so much support already that it was already real, but to be on the ballot and to know that like first step is like done, and now I think is when you climb the mountain. Before it was like, yeah, let's like take a ride to the parking lot, and now it's like now we got to really do that climb, to really get out the vote, to really make people know that like change is possible. For me, it's not just about getting a seat, it's about how we get there and also the political landscape that we have to change, on a local level and a national level. And Worcester, I think we're always looking at Boston or we're looking at AOC and we're, looking away when we actually have to do the work inside. And we need to stop running away from doing our actual internal work here. And so that's my hope is that like, you can be inspired elsewhere, that's good, but also like you can't just once again pass it off to someone else to do the work. We have to do it ourselves.
Right. It takes effort. It's a group effort for sure. So what took you to like what were the steps that led you to being on the ballot for this campaign?
Ooh, I think, the first step, which is simply imagination.
Hmm.
Last year I would say I confirmed within myself my run back in the summer after, a really painful summer of a lot of, Black and brown folks being murdered, and, definitely George Floyd and all the, the unraveling that we've seen in our communities afterwards, and seeing the ways in which our government just didn't respond really. And if anything, there was a lot of gaslighting, a lot of pushing back and saying like, oh, there isn't racism, or like, there is, but, XYZ, and just feeling very dismissed and disregarded in this matter, and seeing COVID and how our community has been neglected and left behind in a lot of decision-making tables, seeing how COVID amplified the horrors of poverty and like homelessness and all those kind of things, for me was kind of that push for me to be like, I keep telling people too, that like another world is possible, and that we have to reimagine something different, especially during a pandemic. We can't go about like normal anymore. And so as I said that in myself, I was like, oh, too, you have to imagine something different too. And in that, I was like, oh man, I guess, running for Worcester City Council is something that I never imagined, but, for the sake of community and to be at decision-making tables for the future, that is something that I'm going to take on. And so I think it started there, deciding within myself to run, and then coming up with a dope team, who are from the community, who love the community, who put their hearts in it. And, we're an amazing team. Like, it's an amazing group of like badass, like mainly women, women of color specifically, running my team. And for me, what I love about it is like, we never really did this, like no one taught me to be a political person. I'm just doing this because I care. And, I think Michelle Obama once said, like, she's been at all the decision-making tables and they're not that smart. It's like how I feel when I'm running. I'm like, like, if these folks can do it, I can do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. So it started off with instilling hope and knowing that you can be the change that you want to see, and making that real for you and your community and your city. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm a youth worker and I actually just turned 30. And so for me, during this time, I was actually feeling very hopeless. Like, I was like at the end, I was burning out. I, helped started Mutual Aid Worcester, and was doing so much work for, just survival, community survival. And I was burning out because I saw no hope in the government. And I was like, if I'm 30, what is a 15-year-old gonna think? How are they gonna navigate the world if they're seeing, deaths daily? And I was like, as someone who's a little bit older and have reached a place of a little bit of privilege and power or authority, whatever you consider it, I was like, I have the duty to really try to carve something out for them, whether I'm successful or not, whether, I get the tools to, shift the government or not. I think they need to see a blueprint or a different imagination of what is possible.
Right. And so that's what inspired you to lead youth and work with youth.
No, I've been doing youth work for like 10 years. I just love them. I think they teach me so much in life. And like, I just feel like a youth myself, to be quite honest.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
I work with some youth at my church, and it's fun. It does make you feel young, just being like it's like you're an adult, but you're not an adult, or you feel, especially being like a young adult.
Yeah, it's like it's a time skip, you just get to all the things that I didn't get to experience as like a refugee child, I get to redo with, actual kids. So that's nice.
That's wonderful. And so you are a refugee, and your family comes from Vietnam?
Yeah.
Okay. So when did you come over to the US, and what was that like?
So I came over in 93, and my dad actually was imprisoned for 6 years because he fought, for his country And once this, fall of Saigon fell, he was imprisoned. They call it re-education camp, but let's just be
That's
honest, it's
great.
prison.
Mm-hmm.
And so I came here when I was 1.5, pretty much. And so I would say it was very interesting to grow up in Worcester, Maine South specifically, because it's one of those areas that's like very diverse and everyone's kind of in the same like low income bracket. Um, and so I didn't really understand a lot of the things that I do now in terms of like, you don't really know you're poor when everyone around you is poor. You kind of just assume, or like, that you're different from your friend because you speak Vietnamese and they speak Spanish and,
Mm-hmm.
XYZ, but you don't realize the systemic things. It's just like, oh, this is normal. Like we're just different in a way. And
Right.
then I would say as I was growing up, I just realized like, especially in schooling, where I'm like, wait, as an Asian person who, is automatically assumed I'm smart, even though I suck at math, and then my friends who are in special ed or in lower, graded classes are like my Black and, brown friends. Like, what's up with that? And then I think it started weaning in probably like middle school that there is something like inherently wrong with the system that teaches a fifth grader that they're stupid, and that's just who they are. If you're graded as like a C or an F student, that's who you are for the rest of your life, and there's no way out of that track. I saw a lot of my friends being in that pit hole. And so yeah, I think that's kind of like my experience of like learning a little bit more about like race. And then when I went to college, like I went to Middlebury College for a bit, and it's like a really rich white school. And that was just horrendously shocking because once again, this is where you're supposed to have like social upward mobility, and these people are supposed to be smart. And I was like, my friends back home who are hustlers, way smarter than these people who keep breaking vending machines and just drinking every weekend. And here I am in a sociology class, and they're just looking down on like everyone I love. So that was kind of like, a little bit about my experience with that. But yeah, as like a refugee, I think it's very difficult because you're not taught your history. I didn't learn about being Vietnamese and Vietnam until I was like 21 when I actively did the search for it. Before then, it's like no one teaches you this school system that it has like a white version of the Vietnam War, and so being, I think, a BIPOC person, you just have to really dig, into your library and into your tools by yourself all the
Mm-hmm.
time.
That's a good point. Everything is whitewashed in our history classes and the whole education system. It's a system. Like they know what they're doing. So you do have to dig into your own
They do.
research. Yeah. Which is interesting, especially like you basically grew up in America and grew up with not without knowing your history or where you come from. Just
Hmm.
that's really interesting. It's good you got to like or you had to do your research and get to know where you come from, who your people are, know the background.
Yeah. And I think at like 21, I realized I didn't know what love was. Like I just had my first like heartbreak, and I was like, whoa, I like don't know what love is because I really love this person. It didn't work out. And then
Mm.
it made me think about how, like we're conditioned to learn certain things, right? And so even with family, like I didn't know how to love my parents, like you just think these are like natural things that might happen, but I think we're so colonized and like detached sometimes because that's the conditioning of life. And so when I realized this moment where I was like, I don't know what love is, then I started thinking about my parents and how like I like abstractly know that I love them. But there's like all these missing pieces,
Mm.
because growing up, they weren't emotionally available. They weren't there for me physically either because they were working so much. And so part of me had to do that remapping of my mind and my emotions to be like, well, this is what actually happened. Like they love you, and all they could do is think about your survival and putting food on the table.
Mm-hmm.
It's like they love you, and culturally, they don't say the word love. They say, "Have you eaten? Here's some food." You know what I mean? So,
Right,
like,
yeah.
in my search of understanding love, I had to go back to my roots, in order to like really do that healing within myself and my family.
Wow. That's that's making me think how love varies across cultures. I don't think I really ever thought about that. But I did know that, like, yeah, my parents are not emotionally available or physically available either, and I never incorporated love into that, which is making me think right now. Like,
Yeah, I
oh,
think
yeah.
it's hard because I think as a child, especially if you like watch, TV and like
Yeah.
you see, this is what being a parent looked like,
It's
and then
supposed to be, yeah.
yeah, and then you like realize like, it's where our families are a lot different than what it is on TV, and we have to really give them some grace. And that people have different love languages.
Right, right, yeah. It's a different type of love. It's not what you see on
Yeah.
TV, but it's there in their own way.
hmm
So you said that you work at the Southeast Asian Coalition.
hmm
How long have you been doing that?
I've been there for roughly 2 years now,
Mhm.
and I love my job. Once again I've always done like more social justice things and youth work and community work, and I feel like there's something about divine timing in life where I was like I wanted there's this book actually called The Revolution Starts at Home, and it's actually about like domestic violence and like you know doing that work in your life and in your family and in your home. But I love that saying, the revolution starts at home, because I think through our intimate connections and our internal things, that's where healing begins. That's what revolution is that transformation. And so yeah, 2 years ago when I had the opportunity to actually work with Southeast Asian immigrants and refugees like myself, I was like, absolutely. This is where the healing begins, and also to think about the generations after me. People don't really understand this, but I actually think and I bank on the descendants after us. Whenever I'm thinking about the timeline of change, I'm like, descendants. That's my automatic thought. And in America, and especially in Worcester, is that like what we're seeing as a Vietnamese person, what I'm seeing is the pattern of like, after the third and fourth generation, you kind of start losing a lot of your history, losing a lot of your language, and also the assimilation to whiteness begins to accrue, as well as the gap of the people who don't end up successful, right? Because people always assume that all Southeast Asians are like East Asians and they're successful. And so my hope is that we kind of mend that almost immediately, to do more intergenerational work, and for Southeast Asian folks to really commit to being more social justice based in our work and how we treat each other, and that we don't get to a point where the gap of like assimilating to whiteness is so high that people neglect people who aren't succeeding because of all the conditionings, whether that's because they're darker Asians or because they're from different regions, that kind of stuff, as well as we commit to the fact that now we're on, indigenous land,
Mhm.
and that this place has also been, built by, Black folks and like other immigrants and refugees, and that we really commit to, the collective, and not just go off into the assimilation of whiteness.
Right, right. It's so important. What kind of work do you do with the Southeast Asian Coalition?
Ooh, that's kind of a hard question, because honestly, we do a little bit of everything,
Mhm.
from supporting small businesses to direct referral services to doing a lot of like recently, because of COVID. Last year, I created the Immigrants and Refugee Pantry, and that was a response to the fact that a lot of folks who are undocumented was too scared to go to a pantry because they would ask for an ID. And, you know, obviously when you're undocumented, that's a scary thing to be asked that. And so I had a lot of people reaching out to me. And so with that, I was just like, we need to fill that gap. And so the Southeast Asian Coalition never quite focused on working with undocumented folks, but you know, we saw the need and we filled it. During the pandemic, also our elders were really isolated. You know, when we talk about, you know, quarantine, right, lockdown, you're like, okay, it's easy for me as, you know, a 30-year-old to kind of do that, but all of a sudden for a 79-year-old, how are they going to get their meds? And so the Southeast Asian Coalition, we started doing deliveries, hot meals to like the essential things for our elders. And we also run a really amazing youth program that's now more steered towards social justice and like them thinking about, you know, their place in the world, as well as really processing what has happened in the last year. So I don't know, it's hard to say. We kind of, you know, is all different types of hat type thing.
Yeah, you do a little bit of everything. You touch, change people's lives everywhere you go, it sounds like.
Try.
Yeah, definitely have a dedication to the community, in your community. What does community mean to you?
Oh, that's a really hard question because Adrienne Marie Brown kind of talks about like, you know, I think it's like mile deep, inch wide. And that's kind of a statement to say that a lot of people, especially nonprofit or people who think about impact, they're always thinking about how many numbers can I get? You know, how many bodies did I feed? How many people did I shelter? And Adrienne Marie Brown talks about critical connection versus actual like these numerical things, right? And so I think community really comes down to connection. I just think about the people who will show up for me and I will show up for them, or the people who I just would naturally show up for. You know, I think it's just building relationships, you know, and I know it's easy to say like Black and Brown community or like refugee community, Vietnamese community, but for me, it's like I think we all transcend those things at a certain point where we're just in connection to people, and that to me matters more than you know identity sometimes because I think we could be very limited. Community is very expansive. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good answer. Because when you think about community as really inclusive, and I think when we do have labels for ourselves or labels for each other, we tend to exclude naturally, or we're not so open to helping others or like seeing needs where there are needs and being willing to help. I think
Yeah.
yeah, communities like the Black community, we're all kind of isolate ourselves, and then we don't see the big picture.
Yeah, I think it's different when we're talking about like different experiences in certain
Mhm.
communities, right? Because like the queer community will experience something different. And like even, you know, BIPOC queer folks is gonna experience something different than white queer folks, you know. And so I think it's it's okay to think of it in terms of like data or experiences and lives and you know that formulates a community collective narrative or experience. But for me, in terms of like when we're living in community, it really is about connection. Yeah.
Right. And how we connect with each other, just on a basic level, just being humans with
Yeah.
basic needs. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's definitely not to say all lives matter. You
No.
know, but you know what I mean? It's not an erasure type statement, but it's
Right.
just like, yeah, connection, I think, is community.
I hear you. That is not the same. Yeah.
Definitely not the
Don't get it
same.
twisted.
Yeah. Because you know, some people will. They be
They'd be
like,
like, oh. So it sounds like your biggest thing is that you want people to be seen and you want people to be heard. And for other people who are either inspired by you or hope to do the same things in their communities, how do you like where would people start with having an impact?
I always say that, there's roles for everybody. I think our society messes up when we have these notions of like, oh, you have to be a charismatic leader, you have to be an extrovert, or you have to be XYZ to be impactful. And once again, that's why I love the notion of like, you know, miles deep, inch wide, because it really is about how much you impact people around you. I think we actually are so obsessed with making like a big swooping change or a big massive, numerical thing that we actually we don't realize how dehumanizing that is. And that like real change or impact is, it's so much easier to influence and impact someone else to change their heart, and then that actually is more impactful. You change one person's heart to, see a little bit differently, to, speak up more about social justice, to feel more confident in themselves, to heal around their trauma. Like that is so much more impactful than, in my eyes, me being like, oh yeah, I did this swooping thing where I gave out $35 to 75 people, you know, which I did do. But for me, it's like you change one person and their view on life, and they change others. This is a domino effect. Money impact could only last so long, but when you change hearts, you actually change things for generations to come. And that for me is what matters. And so when people ask or wonder like, where do you start, I think the starting point is, what are you good at? What do you love? What do you care about? If you tell me you love gardening, then let's start a garden. If you tell me that, yo, I like bikes, it's like, yo, go teach kids how to fix bikes. It doesn't have to be as overwhelming as what many people is. Once again, I think we have this like weird imagination of leadership, and it's like, no, leaders is, it's you. That's all that matters, is like how you show up.
That's I love that statement. It's 100%. It's really beautiful. It's like a chain reaction. You wanna like to see a real change. I feel like you wanna reach hearts and souls so people can change their mindsets and their attitudes towards things, or just instilling awareness in people and changing perspectives. So much so that they will like want to share things with other people and then change other perspectives. And I like what you
Yeah.
said about when we all picture a leader, typically it's like this extroverted person or be charismatic and things like that. But I was talking to friends of mine about leadership and personalities and things like that. And the book, I don't know if you've heard of it. The book is called Quiet: The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop
No.
Talking. Oh, by Susan Cain. It's a good it's a
Oh, that's
good book.
awesome.
Yeah, it's about like quiet leadership, basically how introverted people can be leaders in their communities and in their lives, and how being labeled as an introvert or having introverted tendencies isn't a weakness or anything to be ashamed of. It's something you can work towards, like impacting people and different things.
Yeah, I agree. And I honestly feel like, the narrative of leadership is so harmful to everyone. We're not living and experiencing life to our fullest potential just because we make assumptions on people's capabilities, just because how they like maybe present themselves or how they are. Like I remember when I was doing mutual aid Worcester and our immigrants and refugee pantry, I remember how everyone kind of was just like, oh, who's leading this? And sure, I made the call for people to donate and how to distribute the food boxes. But when it comes to like vegetables, like I don't know anything about vegetables. I would not know how many cucumbers a person need in a week, or how many potatoes. And, we had over 50 volunteers, and they came up with all of this themselves, a person who is a chef actually was like, oh, for a week, this person probably needs this much rice. And, they just automatically was a leader, but no one, walking into a room, no one assumed this person was the one leading the whole thing. And I think that's detrimental to us because, we become very, I don't want to say blinded because that's ableist, but, we become ignorant to, the potential that's around us.
That's, yeah.
Yeah. I also deeply believe in self-fulfilling prophecies. And so when we tell young kids, just because they're an introvert, that means that they're not gifted, or just because they're XYZ, they're not going to be successful. Like those things, we internalize and become self-fulfilling prophecies. And for me, that's where it's so painful and harmful, that we keep seeing it play out. You would think that we would know better by now. And actually in the recent, I'd say in the recent decade, we've seen more people do anonymous activism and anonymous organizing. And I really think that stems from a generation that isn't here for the credentials. They just want justice. They just want liberation.
Yeah.
And even in the beginning of the Black Lives Matter movement, I think everyone was like, well, who's the leader?
Where's this
Obviously,
coming from?
yeah, there's the three the three Black women who created the Black Lives Matter thing. But, different chapters, popping off and all this stuff. People are just like, well, Black Lives Matter is a leaderless movement. And it's like, is that a bad thing?
Right.
Are you trying to assassinate the new leader? Nah, people just want justice and that leaderlessness. And I the servant leader, the one who doesn't have to take all the credits. They're just over it. They just want, liberation. So
I think it's powerful that way too, because everyone is on the same mission, and they're all going to come up with not the same energy, but full force with their passion. It's not just one person who's feeling this passion, and other people are kind of passively following them. But when everyone is all a leader, it's now there's a movement, things happening.
Yeah, exactly. You get to vibe out on all the energies. That's where power comes from. Is different perspective, and also we should just be honest about our limitations and capacities and our weaknesses. That's okay. It's okay to be vulnerable and tell people I suck at math. Someone else can do this piece. And also to do that self-care piece that I think is widely not done, right? Is why do we need a martyr? Why would we want that?
Yeah.
We want people to take care of themselves. So it's yeah, you could do all this stuff, but as people say, it takes a village. Let's just do it together.
You mentioned two things that I want to touch upon. Going back to introversion, and stereotypically in the Asian community, stereotypically, Asians are said to be really quiet, reserved, introverted, and I don't know where I'm going with this, but that, and then leadership.
Well, I think culturally Asian folks are more conditioned to be quiet and be, I think it really stems from this obedient, subservient, and I don't want to say subservient because I think we're working with two different things, right? One is a lot of conditioning religion wise, whether that's Buddhism, Confucianism, that kind of more Zen, Eastern, thing that we got going on for Asians. I think we not naturally, but over centuries of doing more believing in oh, we got to be obedient to our parents and subservient and there's karma. And so there's this ideology that we've maintained within our spirit and soul. And I'm speaking as a Vietnamese person, so I don't want to speak for all Asians, but I think that is culturally how we've kind of been for a really long time. And then this Western notion of subservient, obedient, geisha, that kind of mix emasculating the men in, you know, Asian cultures. I think like these are two forces that is happening, as well as you put in the dynamic of survival and that we're refugees and we had to run, you know, flee our country to come to America. And if we speak up about anything, it almost feels like we're being bad people because we should be obedient and pay America, you know, back for saving us, right? Like we're indebted to America. And so I think, you know, these things are spiraling and circling, especially with our elders, who are just like, we survived, we made it, let's just keep quiet, let's just live the rest of our life here. You go be a doctor and a lawyer and go be successful. Like that's what we came here for. And so, you know, I think that is definitely there. And then for our younger kids, or I keep saying kids because I work with youth, but you know, our younger youth, I would say like, you know, representation, you know, they don't have that many people to witness, to be loud, you know, to be angry, to like speak up. And sometimes our folks are the first ones in their family to speak up, even if they're introverts, even if like their conditioning is to be quiet. They're like, at some point, I have to, you know, say Black Lives Matter, you know, to their parents, or like, let's not vote for Trump and that kind of stuff.
Right, that makes sense. I read your article in the Worcester magazine, and you do touch a little bit about that gap of the generations and staying silent or being appreciative for being in this country so much that there's no reason to complain. Like you're already here, you're working hard. There's like you don't see the issues that are going on.
Yeah, like I was telling the reporter actually, I was like, you know, every Thanksgiving, my parents always thanks America,
Mm,
you know, for us coming over. And in my mind, it's just like indigenous land, like this is their day of mourning, you know? And
right.
so it's one of those where it's like I have to kind of take in their reality, you know, like this is something they deeply feel. And you know, even, you know, when I talk to them about these things, it's like they know the history, you know, they know that, you know, America colonized and like, you know, murdered and genocide on indigenous folks. But, you know, I think some folks just have this way of fragmenting themselves. And as they get older, that's all they could hold on to. And, you know, I could argue with them every year.
Mhm.
But you know, at some point, I think it's more just the sentiment of them surviving, that is really there. And they've grown in other ways where I don't feel like I have to push so hard for certain things, but
Right.
it is a difficult thing to kind of like, you know, wield the intergenerational things that we're all working towards or,
Yeah.
you know, through.
Yeah, completely. It's so weird to have the same pride as your parents and or like not your parents specifically, but immigrant parents. Like even with my parents too, just like how proud they are to be in this country, but we do have to remember where they came from and why they're in America and why they're thankful for that. Whereas like the younger generations, we see the system, the injustices, the how the country was built and everything, and we're like, why are we even here? You know,
Mhm.
but it's a
Yeah.
perspective thing. We do have to like shift our perspective sometimes.
Yeah, I remember the first time I went to Vietnam was like I was 26 or
Mm.
27, and I
Oh, a few
went
years ago.
to, yeah, not that long. And I remember going to like the town or the village my parents were from. And like, you know, those like the medals for those 16-wheeler trucks.
Hmm.
Like that was basically like you just got like three things of that or four and you
Hmm.
built a shelter. And like that was most of the village, like that was on top of a river. And so, you know, I think about that and then how my family came here and our first, you know, spot was like you know, an apartment for like all seven of us. and for them that's a big upgrade.
Yeah.
In that way. And so, I totally have to really think about like, yeah, where they are, right? Their own lived experiences. I can never take that away from them.
Hmm.
They fled a country that, when after they lost, like the government took all their stuff and, didn't allow anyone to speak negatively about the government, or else they were imprisoned even longer or murdered,
Hmm.
right? And so to come to a place where they're like, oh, at least we have voting rights, for them is huge. Even though
Hmm.
in my eyes, I'm just like, this government is rigged. There's like, you get a decent guy or Trump, and for me, that's not enough. But for them, it's like,
It's
do you know
everything.
what's on the other side of this? Like the
You're
other
right.
side is,
Do you know where we came from? Yeah, and they will, well, at least in my culture, they'll always remind you. Maybe all immigrant parents, they'll always remind you where they came from and why you shouldn't complain about whatever is happening here.
Mhm.
It's like a trend.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, there's this quote. Oh, I want us to quote from the article. It says, I think you were talking about, well, kind of like what we just said, like being grateful for America and also protest against the injustices that are part of society. So it's like that balancing act for, I guess, children of immigrant parents. Like, how do we stay grateful for this country, but also protest against the injustices?
yeah. So, I think for me, it's like, my mom and my parents are quiet so that I could speak up, right? They survived so that I could be full, so I could be complete in the sense of like, I don't have to shatter myself to survive anymore. And so actually to me, it's like a duty to fight against injustice. It I'm also very spiritual. So for me, it's like it's how I give back to them karmically, all the things that they couldn't do. In many ways, my mom is a little bit she has like a scarcity mentality. So like let's say, and it's a war mentality. It's
Mm-hmm.
literally a symptom of war. But like, when we used to have food, she like is very like not very sharing of it, and when I was younger as a kid, I was like that's weird, mom.
Mm-hmm.
Like like it's a negative trait. Like why wouldn't you give some extra food to like my friends?
Yeah.
Like but as I gotten older, I was like, wait, this is like literally a war mentality. I need to survive and my kids gotta survive, so I don't have enough for others, right?
Mm.
Um and so for me, the fact that I do community work and I give, it it heals her, it heals that piece of her that didn't didn't know how to give, couldn't give because she couldn't, right? And so when I think about, being their gratitude for America, I think about the ways in which like my duty is to better this place. And not only because of my lineage, but it's because I'm literally on indigenous soil. I like
Mm-hmm.
am, here where, like I mentioned earlier, like Black folks built a lot of this place and immigrant folks. And I'm indebted not to America, but to the actual soil here, to the
Right.
ancestors here, to the spirits who's, within our forests and our rivers. Like without them, like that for me is more important than America. Like they actually made this place. So yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And I think a lot of us are on that same wavelength that we're getting there. Like, at least now, I hope with the year that we're in and everything we've seen, we're all on that wavelength to, I don't want to say give back to our country, but like do something. So at least do something, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, my hope is that we give back to each other, right? Like,
Yeah.
I don't think we're tied to the government or tied to, America. I think we're tied to each other. Like, the whole thing about like our liberation is, tied together and it's interconnected. How can I be free if you're not free? I deeply believe that. I also believe that, like, we could only be as human as how much we could see in others. Like, I think the issue with white supremacy is that they feel so dehumanized that they dehumanize others. And that's an issue. You could only see other people's depth as deep as you are. And I'm sorry to say that a lot of them are shallow, and so, like,
Yeah.
the deeper that we could connect to each other,
Mhm.
I think that the freer we are. So yeah.
No, that's so beautiful and it's so true as well. That's yeah, I'm gonna take that with me. I like that. So you do so much for your community and taking care of others. How do you take care of yourself? What's your self-care thing?
I honestly find it very hard during COVID because a
Mm.
lot of my self-care goes with, like, seeing people. Like, I'm a very social person, and COVID, like, knocks that out of the realm of possibilities. And so I honestly feel like I just like to ground myself in the beauty of the world. Like, I like going for walks. I like seeing nature. I like the small things in life, whether that's, like, seeing my nephew, who's like 3, or watching anime with my other nephew who's 18,
Mhm.
and just being in community with people. Because actually, a lot of the work that I do is easy because there's other people. Like,
Right.
there's other people who are there to laugh, to make decisions, to share this pain. And I think that that's what makes it a lot easier. I also was walking the other day, and I'm, as a very spiritual person, as I mentioned, like, people talk about, like, the things you hear inside your head, and oftentimes it's like in reference to, like, bad parenting, or, like, um the detrimental, like, things that we think inside our heads, like we're not good enough, we're not doing enough, blah blah blah. But on my walks, like, what I hear in my head is that, like, I loved you since the beginning of time. And so for me, I think my spirit and my ancestors are always there for me, and that's what I ground myself in.
Mhm. Just being in the beauty of the world and in nature, like in the most simple form.
Yeah, because I think, like, what I really learned is that we have to make our own happiness, and so, from the petal of a leaf, how do I feel happy, when I walk, just doing that. Life is a very difficult place sometimes, and you have to find beauty. That's the secret. You just have to, and you
Yeah.
have to make it, you have to create it, you have to believe it.
I like that too. Just the little things, really, because life is hard. Like we've had a rough season, so you really just have to find the beauty in all. Rough is an understatement.
No,
Beauty
I'm
in the
like, season. It feels like we're in, like, 5 seasons of this.
it's bad word choice. Yeah,
Can we
it's
get
been
a
a time.
finale yet?
The little things, just yeah, it's been a lot of negativity and just a dark time. So if we can like find beauty and joy in little things, I think nature is a good example or a good thing to be in because it's always there.
Yeah, yeah. And I think we have to remind ourselves that we're always co-creating with the universe and with the people around us. And at some point, we have to take ownership of, the way things play out sometimes. And not everything is going to be, perfect, or, like we mentioned, it's a hard season, right? Like,
Mhm.
I'm pretty sure most of us aren't like creating that part of it. But if we're given something that's, like, really really difficult, you still have some agency to create the other bits of it, and I hope that people remember that. It's like, you get to create some beauty, no matter what, no matter what.
Yeah. I think not a lot of people hear that, so they don't believe it or they don't know it at all.
Yeah. No, that's super real. I feel very lucky, and I hate feeling lucky as if it's like a lottery or it's like a slot machine. Like I think everyone should feel um deeply connected, to the universe and to their powers, really.
Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes we think about power and we think about like the white definition of power,
Yeah.
but what I'm talking about is that power that you innately are born with, to wield fate in your hands and, make things as you can dream. And I deeply believe that, even though, like I said, I know we're in a very difficult time and it might
Mm-hmm.
not feel like it. I also think that like time is a very constructive thing,
Mm-hmm.
and that even if healing doesn't happen now or even this life, that it happens, for you in the next life or for the generations after you. And
Right.
so sometimes we give up because of this moment in time, and rightfully so. I'm not saying that it's not valid to feel like giving up and hopeless. I just mean that like, on a we're like this little atom in a
Mm-hmm.
huge universe. And so
Yes.
sometimes if we ground ourselves in that, I think we'd see differently.
Absolutely. Knowing our potential and knowing what powers we hold is important.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. I know someone had to hear it. Do you know who else is running for the
Worcester
for
City
this?
Council.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like, we have more diverse candidates this year, more as in there's like three of us.
Mm.
um, but I think one of the things, when it comes to representation, I want folks to like really think about how representation. I think someone once told me like skin folk, but not kinfolk.
Hmm.
And I'm not saying this to direct it to any of the candidates in Worcester, but I think I want to remind folks that like representation is beyond just like a similar identity, but it's also about similar values and similar beliefs in ways in which the government should run and stuff like that. Because I think there's times where we're excited to be like, oh my God, there's a queer person. And then you're like, wait, Caitlyn Jenner is running for governor in Cali, and this person hates trans and queer people, even though they're trans, you know what I mean? Um, so I think that's what I would want to like really stress when it comes to representation, and because sometimes people weaponize like identities, sadly. So I know that Lightfoot in Chicago got a lot of slack being like a lesbian Black woman, but really not serving the community. And so my hope in terms of like representation is like, yes, I'm a queer non-binary refugee running for Worcester City Council, but I'm also a community person from Worcester, who really knows the ground really well. I'm a street medic, so like I do support these actions that's happening on the ground. I've been doing, community organizing and youth work to really tend to the foundation of our community for the last 10 years. And so, I think my also hope for representation is that people start seeing themselves, so that we could shift the political landscape. I don't want people to think that, oh, you have to be college educated and privileged to run. I want you to be like, whoa, Thu ran and didn't really know too much about local government, but had these beliefs in, changing politics enough to run, even though they had no idea, the first step to becoming a city councilor, that you are a genius enough to make these things happen, to make change happen. So that's what I hope people think about when they see representation. It's not just identities, but also identities and you see your own like intelligence and genius through me. I know that was a weird way to say not through me, but you get it.
Yeah.
But that it's reflected back to them, that they are
Yeah.
also leaders.
Absolutely. It all comes down to your passion, what you're passionate about, despite, your educational background or history and things like that. It's like, what are you passionate about and what do you want to do about it?
Yeah, like how like it's all problem solving, and I
Mm.
think so. I used to be a gamer when I was in high school, and I think gamers are so great because they're always problem solving. So
Yeah.
it's like if you could problem solve in a game, like problem solve in real life, what does it look like for us to get to justice?
Mm.
We have people who love anime, and it's like a lot of anime is about revolution. Like, how about you
Right.
become, the main character or the secondary character? Like, totally possible.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Shifting perspectives. I like it.
yeah. All the things that, we have in our mind, like I believe is possible. And, we once again tend to like look elsewhere or watch anime for escapism. And it's like, nah, your life could be just as fulfilling and epic,
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome. What is your advice to the youth and people, or even those with immigrant parents, who are looking to engage in social justice work or make an impact?
First thing I would say is to tend to your heart, and find what it needs. Because in order for us to do this work, we really have to know our core and what we need. I I see too often that people come with the pain and the trauma and the hurt of oppression, and rightfully so, right? Um, but in order to really do this work and feel the love and the beauty in it, like you have to tend to your heart and know what and learn what it needs, right? Whether it needs friendship, whether it needs good food, whether it needs more books or whatever. You have to know your heart and what you need. If not, we're just gonna be like crawling to justice, we're just gonna be like bleeding and aching towards liberation. And I think we have to embody liberation and justice every second of the day. And that starts with us. How do you feel free in your body, in your spirit, in your mind? Um, so yeah, start with your heart and your needs.
Mhm. I love your perspective on life and everything in general. It's very insightful and helpful.
Yeah, because like I said, I don't think anyone should ever feel overwhelmed by, our ability to transform hearts or to change. We just have all these narratives as if it takes a lot, but it really doesn't.
Hmm.
It really just stems from, even a conversation on your porch with somebody,
Yeah.
or and we also undervalue the things that we naturally do, right? So like when you're having a conversation with your friend who's depressed, like that's healing work. Give yourself credit for that. Or when you're having a hard day and you're the one who's struggling to leave your bed and eat, and then you decide to take a sip of Gatorade because that's all the strength you have to do, but that keeps you living a little bit longer. That's healing, that's changing. And so we need to give ourselves credit for the little things as well, and to see that that is actually a magnificent thing that we're doing. We're just told that we're so insignificant so often that we
Mm.
actually believe it, and it's all false. Like literally, one of the quotes I love is like, "I am my ancestors' wildest dreams," and it's so true. Like most of us are. Most of our ancestors, and even my parents, like I mentioned, can't even imagine how we're living right now because it was never available to them. And so I think it's our duty to really like live that out.
Hmm. I like that, giving ourselves credit for the things that we overlook, things that we don't think is like is anything big. Yeah,
Yeah.
and that does a lot. I wanted to touch on anti-Asian sentiments and racism, which isn't anything new. So there has been an increase since COVID, and there's also been an increase in supporters all around, just on social media at least. I feel like everything is
Mhm.
on social media. I don't know about in in the world, but social media, there's all
Yeah, we're
types
still
of
in that COVID life. Yeah.
yeah. So like, do you have any messages to allies or people who are looking to support the Asian community?
Yeah. Hmm. I think I would like people to actually do the educational piece on their own. Especially in well, this as someone who works in nonprofit, for any funders out there and rich people, you should support Asian people with resources to do the healing work, and the internal work of our communities. So that's one. But in terms of like allies who, are more like students learning or just people learning, I really think um that yeah, y'all should learn about the history of Asia the same way that I need to, because like Asia's a big country, like, and then there's South Asians, there's Southeast Asians, there's East Asians, and then all our histories are different, and colonization plays out kind of similarly. Um, but we've done so horrible at learning Asian history in general. For a country that has a lot of Asian people in it, the fact that a lot of people can't tell the difference between like Chinese folks and like Japanese folks and Vietnamese folks and like Laotians, like we need to do better. Like straight up, point blank. Like yeah, like we need to just educate ourselves on the history. Of like open a goddamn map and just do that, learning of that. And then afterwards to really do the learning of the different wars that we had and why there was a different movements of diaspora, right? And I think that will teach us a lot about not only Asia, but the way in which the Western colonizers have really globally destroyed many places. And that is also I would say you should do the same for like a lot of like Latina countries, because people don't know the difference between a Colombian and like an El Salvadorian and a Puerto Rican, and it's like we just need to do better at learning. And so yeah, that's what I would say for allies is like step one. Let's just really do the basics of educating ourselves.
You're right. Doing the research, finding the resources, because I feel like it's so easy for us to just group people into categories, like basic categories. Like everyone who looks a certain way is this. Everyone who looks a certain way is that, without digging deep into the differences, the nuances, and what it means for specific groups within a community. Like for Vietnamese people within the Asian community.
Yeah, like for our program, our social justice program, one of our first questions was like, what does it mean to be Asian American? And we asked each other in a group. And I don't think any of us came to an answer because the question is like, why are we all here together?
Right.
And in this group, there's like, you know, South Asian folks, there's Cambodian folks, there's Vietnamese folks, there's like, Burmese folks. And then we're like, why are we here together as Asians? And we couldn't come up with an answer.
Mm.
And it really is, colonization and, these borders, these maps, these fake imaginations of nation state, and who gets to claim this land, who gets to do that, and why is it a permanent thing now, you know because because if a war would pretty much start up if a little bit of Vietnam tried to be like, I'm independent.
Mhm.
um but yeah.
Before I ask you the last question, do you want to put your socials out there, social media, for people to keep up to date with you and your
Oh yeah.
campaign? Yeah.
Yeah, so my Insta is at vote two, and so that's vote VOTE and then THU. And then you don't have to follow my Twitter. It's okay. You can find me if you want, but Twitter is not my jam. It's okay. I take the L for it. But Facebook, it's also at too.
All right, cool. Thank you. And people who are voting for you, that's solely within the city of Worcester.
Yeah. So it's at large. So anyone in Worcester can vote for me.
Okay.
Unless you're trying to do voter fraud, which I will say you should not do if you're not in Worcester.
No voter fraud. If you're in the Worcester area, vote for 2.
Yeah, but if not, you could always donate. Donations is very helpful. And actually, I struggled a lot with thinking about running because I was like in a pandemic, in a capitalistic space. Should I really run and like ask people to donate to me, when people are actually hungry? And I do financial like redistributing during mutual aid for others. And so it's really hard for me to be like, yeah, let me tell people to donate to me. But actually, I think one, systemic change is very important. And then two, like I said, I'm hoping for a political shift and an imagination shift in how we do this, work together. And then I also, my core is that I'm doing economic justice and really hiring a campaign manager who's from the community and giving them an actual livable wage and hiring youth to really be more politically active and do this kind of work. And so that's kind of my spiel on being able to be like, yes, please donate to me, because these are really important things to get behind.
You're right, absolutely. Like you said earlier, it takes a whole village. So yeah, that's what you're doing. Or that's what you're all about.
Yeah, so you could donate at vote2.com.
Vote2.com. All right, got it. So to close, what is your message that you're leaving the listeners? What should they take away from you and what you do? What's your overall message?
Oh, that's such a hard thing to kind of summarize. Well, I guess I will quote Grace Lee Boggs, who says wage love. And I love that because oftentimes you hear wage war, and I think at this point in time, we need to wage love, and not in a way that, once again, is like all lives matter, unity. It's really about waging love and pushing for accountability, for justice, for liberation, and for our hearts to be transformed, and to really be grounded in each other. Like, I don't think we'd be able to make it through a pandemic unless we actually radically transform the way we imagine each other, ourselves, and our world. So I guess I'll close it with that.
All right, yeah, that's perfect.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for being on.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, no problem. This was great. I learned a lot. I'm taking a lot with me. Alrighty.
All right, sweet. Well, thank you so much for such a beautiful conversation.
Oh no, thank you. Thank you so much for listening. Hope to catch you in the next episode, and be sure to check out Thu's website at vote2.com. That's VOTETHU.com. And my hope is that we can all take something away from this episode and look into doing some inner work and reflection so that we can be impactful in our own lives and in the lives around us. Let's be intentional about the lives that we live. All original music produced by Stubborn Soul. Be sure to check him out on all music listening platforms at STBRNSAL. Let's walk in love. Peace out, guys.